I'll just start off by saying that, as some of you may know, although originally from what's so-called known as Canada, I'm now living in Australia. So today I'm coming to you this morning, morning our time, from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And Jess is coming to you from the others, the north. I'm in the southern hemisphere, and Jess is up top in the north.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jess Shane. I'm here in South Brooklyn on the unceded homeland of the Lenape people, and I would like to pay respect to the Lenape and other Indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters, and the elders who have lived here before, and the Indigenous people here today and generations to come. And I know that all of us are here on different lands, all of which, have their caretakers. And so, if you want to pay credit, then please do. But I want to acknowledge all of us grounded in place today. Yeah, back to you, Michelle.
Yeah, that's a great. It's all really, interconnected for us. That all of the work that we do increasingly with constellations and working with sound, and like all of the works you're about to hear today are intensely grounded in place in some way or another, all coming from kind of different avenues. But yeah, I think that's something to really keep in mind as we start to talk through the pieces today. And that's kind of one of our running themes, is thinking about home and place, and belonging. So in terms of constellations, though, so we've been a podcast, a sound art collective, a kind of group of people that's been interested in making works that kind of fall outside of the distinctions of straightforward kind of radio, straightforward music. Well, often our pieces kind of juggle many genres and are interested in using sound as a way of like investigating and interrogating our place in the world. I mean, we live in a very visually dominated culture, so it's kind of like, if we can sit back and listen for a moment, like what can we discover or sit with or be with in the world differently? And a big motivation for Constellations has just been making space to be in conversation with artists. And that's something that's really challenging, I think, in an era of needing to have intense outputs and deadlines and all of that. And so we're really happy to be with all of the four artists we've chosen to be in conversation with today, because I think just being in conversation and talking about the works are one of the things that this project is kind of founded around, that I think a close listener is a really valuable and yeah, incredible kind of not quite a resource, but just to have someone alongside you as you're making work or experiencing work is just, I think, one of the exceptional things we can kind of do for each other in terms of generosity. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. If you're curious about constellations, I'm sure Darren's got links and such on whatever websites, and we can post things in the chat after. But yeah, just for today, you'll have a chance to listen to four really, yeah, really amazing pieces that all of these artists have worked hard on, and we've worked, yeah, kind of closely with everyone. So I'm really excited. Um, yeah, maybe I'll pass it back to Jess for a sec before we play, and we're gonna start with our. Well, maybe I should just do a quick intro of the artist. I actually don't have everyone's bios right in front of me. I'm so sorry. I should have done that, but in lieu of that, so I'll just kind of name the four artists so you know who they are out of the squares of people, and we'll go to them. But we've got RF Mervaji coming to us from, wait, you just told us you're in,
Right.
where are you again?
South Turkey.
You're in
So I'm
Turkey.
yeah, I'm based in Tehran, but at the moment I'm in southern Turkey in Adana.
In Adana. Great.
Yeah.
And then we've got John Hill. Great. And then Sophia, hello. And then Nicole.
Boy, you can see, yes.
Yes, yes, Steinert-Evoy. So sorry for not saying your full name, Sophia. And then Nicole Pingon, who is also in Australia, also in this very early time zone with me.
Yeah, Michelle and Nicole, thank you so much. It's like 7 a.m. where you guys are. So good job for waking
We're
up
here.
Sound Art to chats.
We made it.
um So yeah, I think I could give you the list of accomplishments for each of these people, but to be honest, they're all incredible in their own right, and I will just spend the time talking to people, and you'll kind of hear that. But we go on our website after, and we do have updated files for people there. Everybody's really great. So yeah, I guess our first stop on the conversation and listening to her today is with Arif. So we're gonna listen to Arif's piece. I guess here's a question for you, Arif. Like I believe that Darren, like you've got the video set up and ready to go, so we're happy to do that. But just in case you like you're fine with the video versus just the audio playing, right, Arif?
Absolutely. I think actually those moments of translation maybe they'll be helpful in some way. I'm totally fine with that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it was interesting to work on this piece with Arif and kind of as we kind of curated or listened alongside. And we had like a transcript from Arif, but our early versions, I was just purely in the sound, and it was a different experience listening with the subtitles the first time, but like just different, not nothing is bad or worse or different or better, but it was just, yeah, it's interesting how the visual impacts. But anyways, curious for other people to listen.
We'll talk about it
And
after. We'll talk about how the visual
yeah, so sorry
version. No, I
I'm
think
preempting.
I think it's great to you can close your eyes while you're listening or you can read it, but I think that being in relationship to both versions is a really great way to experience the piece. And we'll talk about how it works differently as a translated and non-translated piece, I think, in the conversation that follows.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So yeah, over to you, Darren, to hear the piece.
عقارب
عارف جون
عقارب عارف جان بیداری؟ یه کاری باید داشتم عزیزم. عقارب
عارف جون
عارف جون
عارف جون
عقارب
عارف سلام
من نمیدونستم برای خوابی یا بیداری.
عارف جون دلم برات تنگ شده.
tortoise, you know, carries his house on his back. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot leave home.
امروز فکر نکنم بهتون برسم. امروز من
دیروز کارم تموم شد دیشب، قیافه‌شو ندیده بودم.
فدای تو خوشگل بلا.
ببین امروز تا قبل ساعت 7 اگه قرار شد بمونه اینا، مثلا ساعت چه میدونم، اگرم نه که دیگه
یادم نمیاد چی بود.
به نظر من بهتره. به من گفته بودن
یه دونه آهنگ قدیمی بود که
ماشین میاد دم منزل
نگران نباش.
روزی روزگاری
Once upon a time.
کنار یه برکه توی یه بیشه
دو تا مرغابی و یه لاک‌پشت توی یه برکه با هم زندگی میکردن.
A tortoise and two dogs lived in a harmony together.
رفته رفته خشک میشد و مرغابیا به فکر این شدن که از اونجا برن.
بعد این لاک‌پشت به اینا گفت که
من طاقت دوری شما رو ندارم.
آقا شما میخوایم برین یه جای دیگه، یه راهی پیدا کنین منو با خودتون ببرین.
Find a way to take me with you.
یکیشون میره چوب برمیداره میاره. میگه
قاره
آره جون.
میخواستم بپرسم که
و لطفا همه
چجوری بگم مثلا
ببین
یادم یه برکه‌ای بود.
خلاصه میخواستم بگم که
مثلا دیگه
They carry the tortoise away.
All right.
Wonderful. Oh,
Thank you.
What a treat to get to listen to your work, Aris. So good. I mean, yeah, we'll get into it, but some of those field recordings just, love listening to them.
Thank you. I think something to right off the bat mention about those field recordings is that all of them came from border regions in Iran. So the border of Turkmenistan, the border of Afghanistan, the border of Iraq. And since the piece is, in a sense, about borders and about distance and about not quite being there, I thought it was maybe relevant to capture some of the sounds along that kind of gradient cultural shift that happens along political borders. You know, politics will define borders in ways that culture just doesn't care about. I think a little bit of context that I would certainly like to provide is, you know, the piece is called Pointing at Canopus, and some people call it Canopus. And for those who don't know, I'm going to call it Canopus. But for those who don't know, Canopus is the second brightest star in the sky. And in certain parts of the world, it hangs very low on the horizon. Despite being incredibly bright, it's not visible everywhere. And in some places, at some times of the year, it ducks below the horizon and disappears from view before returning back. And many cultures have engaged with Canopus, but I think perhaps the most relevant example would be the Bedouins. The Bedouins felt a very strong connection to Canopus um, as a symbol of impermanence. And they themselves, being a nomadic group of people, I think felt a certain kinship with the fact that Canopus disappears sometimes and reappears at other times. And I think it's also important to know just how low it hangs on the horizon. We're not pointing upward when we point at Canopus, we're pointing forward. And So I think that that's important context. And I think that what I should explain is sort of my process of how I arrived at what we can loosely call a narrative. I know it's very frustrating to have a series of sentences that just end in prepositions or a series of ums and ahs. But let me sort of backtrack a little bit and explain my process. I was very interested in creating a piece out of WhatsApp voice messages that I had received after I had moved to Iran. It was a lot easier for me to communicate by voice messages because my typing in Farsi is a bit slow and I never grew up reading or writing the language. And so, I can get by, but it's actually oftentimes a lot easier for me just to send a voice message. And I realized that I had all of these voice messages that were gathering in my WhatsApp. And while it didn't particularly matter what any individual was saying, I realized that there were these moments where people were umming and awing. And at some point, it kind of struck me that the the ah, the the placeholders that we put in language are untranslatable in some way, but also don't require translation. If there's anything that would connect all human language, it would be an it would be an awe, it would be something that helps us, like I did it right now, that helps us sort of create space to move on to the next thought. And in doing a piece about language, I thought it was sort of interesting to be able to play on that because you don't actually need to know what's going on in order to understand. I think it's a very human thing. So basically, what I had done, I'm interested in the way we remember stories, and I'm interested in storytelling as it relates to memory, particularly for diaspora communities. Myself being of Iranian heritage, but being born in Canada, I have always felt a kind of a distance with my culture, and I've always sort of felt as though there is a decided line that sort of a line of demarcation between my home and between my heritage. Um, and so, as a way of engaging with this, I had asked maybe 5 or 10 of my friends to, without explanation or without research, tell me a story, the story of the tortoise and the ducks. Now, the story of the tortoise and the ducks appears in virtually all collections of fables throughout the world, and the details of it change, and even the morals of it change. But there are significant points where, there's enough detail that connects these stories, and certain cultures interpret it very differently. So I won't go into all of the ways that people interpret it, but basically what I had done is ask a series of my friends to I basically said, "Do you remember the story of the tortoise and the ducks?" And the people who did remember it, I said, "Don't look it up. Just send me a voice message telling me what you remember about it." And let me just tell the story quickly because I don't actually explain it very much in the piece. The way that I have heard it, and it's different in other places, is that there's a tortoise that's living in this pond with these ducks, and it really loves these ducks. It's like a good friend. So they're good friends. But the ducks can fly. And so the ducks fly away whenever the pond dries up, and they come back when the water returns. And the tortoise says to itself, "I wish I could fly. Why am I stuck being this slow moving creature? Why am I stuck in this one place?" And so they concoct a plan with these two ducks. And the ducks, one of them grabs a stick and puts it in its mouth, its beak, I guess. And the other duck grabs the other end of the stick and puts it in its beak. And the tortoise, with its, I guess they also have beaks, but with its mouth, grabs the middle. And by doing so, they're able to take the tortoise into flight. They're able to fly away with the tortoise. But before doing so, they go to the tortoise and they say, "Listen, we're going to take you somewhere. But if you open your mouth, if you dare to speak during this journey, you will fall to your peril." Now, what I think is very interesting, like, turtles, when they tell this story, will often explain it as the origin story behind the turtle shell in its sort of patterned ways, because it falls to the ground and smashes to bits, and then it gets reassembled. But what I thought was sort of an interesting metaphor to play against is this idea of silence, and this idea of there are things that we cannot change. We cannot change our heritage. We cannot change many things in life. And sometimes a quiet acceptance of the circumstances that we find ourselves in can be a meaningful experience and can be a difficult experience because we are hardwired to want to make sense of things. We're hardwired not to end sentences and prepositions. We're hardwired to complete narratives, but not all narratives can be completed. And sometimes a mere acceptance of the circumstances that we're in is enough. Um, and so I guess, I mean, is all of that clear? Does that kind of make some sense?
Yeah, totally. And I guess one thing we're interested in the kind of composition of the piece is also, and this is my bad for not giving everyone's bios, but like RF, how you also like used your kind of musical training in composing and working with the field recordings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, much of the piece is sort of predicated on a solo contrabass or double bass, I guess. And double bass, it does exist in a solo context, but not usually. Usually, the instrument that I play and the instrument that I chose is one of accompaniment. It's actually a very maternal instrument in the sense that it is one that provides support and is usually played in the context with others. So double bass in a solo sense is actually a bit of an uncomfortable and an awkward role for it. And for somebody who is born in one heritage and speaks one language at home and eats particular foods at home and then goes outside and experiences a different culture, we also have this kind of awkward fit of like, where am I? Who am I? Is this my home? Is that my home? In Iran, I'm Canadian. In Canada, I'm Iranian. I'm very interested in ideas like this. Um, and so I think like maybe a detail that sometimes is maybe lost on first listen is that we're actually sort of telling, it starts with a motorcycle. And I think that a motorcycle is a great symbol of free will. You sit on it and you go wherever you want, and maybe you have a companion and maybe you have some things, but ultimately it's pretty much you in the open road. But where we end up is the sound of a train, and a train runs on a fixed rail and it carries communities with it. And I suppose what I thought was happening there symbolically is that culture does act as a sort of train. There is a community, there is a collectivity that happens there, and there is a certain amount of like giving up your free will sitting on a train. You can decide to board the train, but you don't have very much control sort of over where it goes. And so I thought that was kind of an important detail in the piece, but it maybe is not totally self-evident. Are are there any questions? Like, how should I frame this?
Well, I just love that, Ara, because I've listened to this piece so many times, but I never thought about that. So it's great because like having listened to various iterations of this piece as you were working on it, hearing you talk about it in this way is so expansive and exciting for me because.
Maybe we will go forward onto John Hill's piece, and then yes, I think also artists feel free to ask each other questions when we get to the points where questions feel good, and no pressure either way, but yes. I'm going to turn it over to Jess to intro John's piece.
Yes, so I guess, I don't know, John, do you want to say anything about the piece before we listen, or should we just listen cold and then we'll talk about it afterwards? What's your
I think that listening cold is a pretty good idea. There are no subtitles, but there's a call and response. The response is a translation of the call, and that's all that you have to keep in mind. I'm happy to go and talk my head off afterwards, but I'm very anxious to hear to see everyone's responses and for everyone to listen.
Great. Thank you so much. So this is Translation of Prayer by John Hill.
we will seek. Dwajola Hajye. We will seek stones. Dwajon on Hajye. We will build. Yakwadna Suni Hujye. We will build homes. Yakwadna Suni Nus Hajye. We will love. Dwanolog Hajye. We will protect each other. Yakwadadan Hade Hajye. We will hurt. Dwanali Yog Hajye. We will blame each other. Yakwadalas Hajye. We will fight. Yakwadalios Hajye. We will fight each other. Yakwadadaya Hajye. We will learn. Dwawaya de Hajya Hajye. We'll learn our language. Dwaya wana Yadyal Hajye. We will fight. Yakwadilio Gage Yadye. We will fight death. Yakwa ad Doj Hajye. We will recognize. Yakwa ad Algwese Hajye. We will recognize you all. Yakwa dol ad Hajye. We will hunt. Yakwa dol ade nis adeg Hajye. We will hunt the future. Yakoni a waj Yahweh go Hajye. We will make the world. Dwaste leste Hajye. We will laugh. Dwadu ligs dilisid Hajye. We will laugh loud. Dwanikol ha Hajye. We will forget. Dwawa nudi Hajye. We will lose language. Dwala deg wisas Hajye. We will eat. Dwala deg wisas oslule ni ge Hajye. We will eat whiteness. Yokwajia go Hajye. We will fish. Dwasa itye yoche ago Hajye. And we will fish for dreams. Dwaliwa wa Hajye. We will sing. Uksa nedwa liwa wa Hajye. We will sing together. Dwaloni kugla sa Hajye. We will mourn. Dwalonik ugalas yadye Hajye. We will mourn alone. Dwa wian ayadel Hajye. We will learn. Dwa wian ani de lihu dagwood Hajye. We will learn our ways. Yuk yuni Hajye. We will make. Yuk yuni anu dunhu Hajye. We will make peace. Yukwa ash ad hon Hajye. We will cry. Yukwa ash ad hona gi Hajye. We will cry now. Yukwa ash ad hona gi Hajye. We will cry for then. Dwakalo anas Hajye. We will smile. Dwalo wish o Hajye. We will live. Dwagalo anas Hajye. We will seek. Dwajale Hajye. We will seek stones. Dwajan a Hajye.
Yagea. My name is Yagea. It means she remembers. Itagana Nuhadi.
Dagana Nuhadi.
Yeah.
All right, I'll change the pronoun.
Yeah. Okay. Dagana Nuhadi. Gana Nuhadi. Luna Nuhadi. Luna Nuhadi.
That means he's doing it right now, right?
Yes.
Luna Nuhadi.
He's filling it. Well, we want the people that are buying the dictionary and learning to speak, a lot of them are doing it, to hear my voice on there. We're trying to keep our culture.
I think it's at a point where there are many within the community that recognize that this is really a critical time, that the number of speakers that we have remaining is dwindling dramatically. And were it not for contributions from people like Maria, and there are very few remaining, we would be at a serious point in terms of being able to have the capacity, the depth of language available for us to research so that we can preserve it.
This is the kind of project that takes a community to do. It's generation.
The forgotten journals of a culture, discovered and brought to life.
It's their life and times as they saw it.
Experience the provocative and moving history of a native tribe.
To carry that on, that's something to be proud of.
Witness emotional accounts from the journals of those who have lived history.
One of the most important things we can do is to tell our story.
The Oneida Speak.
So yeah, like Michelle was saying, that the pieces sort of come about out of a few things, but so just a little bit about me. My name is John Hill. I was born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario, and I my family's from Six Nations of the Grand River, which is on the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon territory was governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, which was established by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which I belong to, the Anishinaabe and the Mississaugas of New Credit. And this part of Southern Ontario and Canada was sort of, and upstate New York as well, was sort of was essentially known and understood to be a place of great wealth, not for any individual or for any nation or any corporation, but for all living beings. And so the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement represents the agreement between all these different nations to protect the land and to protect the beings on the land. And so I just wanted to give that as an acknowledgement sort of off the bat. So within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, there were originally 5 nations, and now there are 6. The Mohawk, the Oneida, the Tuscarora, the Onondaga, and the Seneca, and the Cayuga, and then the Tuscarora joined later. Within the language group that all of these nations shared is relatively the same. It's within the Iroquois and Algonquin language stem, and but in modern times, due to an ongoing and pervasive and historical and systemic erasure of Indigenous languages, currently today, less than 50 people live in less than 50 people are alive today who can fluently speak the Oneida language. And so there is a project underway by multiple institutions, universities, nonprofits, and community organizations on reservations and reserves within Canada and the United States to preserve the Oneida language. And so I got into how I sort of fell into this world was in early 2019, I realized that for a long time nobody was going to call me an artist unless I started calling myself an artist. And so I set out on a mission to basically create for myself the kind of artistic legacy and practice that I had in reality cultivated over all of my life since I was born, but had denied myself the legitimacy of acknowledging. And so part of that process was getting affiliated and getting to know and diving headfirst into a myriad of different styles and different ways of creating art, and sound art was one of those ways that really spoke to me, because I've been a lifelong lover of music and a lifelong lover of the radio, and sound art just seemed like the logical extension to all of that. And so I fell into sound art, I fell in love with Constellations, and eventually I became a Constellations application filler outer, and so much time later, thanks to Michelle, Jess, and another contributor, Aliyah Pabani, I created this piece that is, in a sense, that when boiled down to its bare essentials, is a story of a person trying to speak a language that he doesn't know and that he doesn't know well enough to speak fluently, but is trying to learn how to communicate with the non-human world. And you know, the Oneida people, the Mohawk people, the Onondaga people, the Seneca people, and the Cayuga people, you know, they all had an equal share and hand in protecting this land and speaking to the land. And built within this cosmology and within this sort of methodology of taking care of the land was directly speaking to it, acknowledging out loud at gatherings of large groups of people, um, why we are all here, which is the land, which provides us everything that we need to live. And I had become very intimately aware of the Thanksgiving address during my studies at various times in my life of the Mohawk language, which is very well understood and very well kept alive by folks in my home community of Six Nations of the Grand River. But I wanted to bring some form of literature and some form of voice to the language that my ancestors spoke, my direct ancestors through my matrilineal line, through my mother's mother. And that project has taken me a very long time to bring to fruition, and there have been a lot of stops along the way, and the project is in fact still evolving. But a big part of this project is that it is alive, just as it is my intention to keep the Oneida language alive. It is alive in the sense that it is ever evolving and ever changing. And my hope is to bring a new iteration of this piece to light at some point later this year through the work of language instructors and language speakers. So that's a big mouthful, but my training throughout my longest running practice throughout my life was that as a poet. So I originally wrote a prayer in the form of a poem originally, and then I went through the effort by consulting various documents, including the Wisconsin Oneida Language English Dictionary, and some videos and some community resources created by communities in Wisconsin, but also some Canadian resources as well, to basically create this hybrid English Oneida language piece. To date, the only language piece that I've heard in the original Oneida language and also in English. And it is not perfect. I'm sure that there are some people out there who are more experienced learners than me, who would have a quarrel with how I pronounce certain words. But I think there's not enough art that is about failure and about learning. And I really wanted to create that process and be vulnerable because I wanted to represent the precarity of the language itself. But
Thank you so sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. I open the floor to everybody else.
Well, I'm so glad that you raised that you're a poet, because I feel like there's actually some great kinship between Arif's piece and John's piece being side by side, because there's a sort of longing, I feel like, that's expressed through both of these pieces through a type of abstraction. Like, Arif's piece ends with these prepositions, these half sentences, these, attempts to connect. And your poem, which is translated perhaps like imperfectly in some places, although, who am I to know? It's perfect to me. But there's also the experience of the listener is one of trying to figure out what it means to gather stones or to eat lightness. And I'm wondering if you could talk about why you gravitated towards abstraction, and perhaps also the stereo field, like why you separated the stereo field, the English on one side and the Oneida on the other. Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to both of those things.
Yeah, I think that poems are incredibly powerful pieces of they're powerful weapons in the sense that um, during a time in my life where I was learning how to really relate to people who didn't understand my circumstances as an urban indigenous person, poetry was the best way for me to use the English language, something that was sort of forced upon me through circumstance, through historical circumstances. It was like my best shot at trying to articulate what was going on in my head. And so all of the metaphors and abstractions and abstract ideas in the poem, they have relevancy to a certain kind of entity, that being the land in and of itself, that the land has a memory and an understanding of the things that have taken place on it, is a deeply held belief that I have and that many indigenous people have. And you know so the translation of the word Oneida comes from means people of the standing stone. And so the idea was that by referencing stones in the poem, that I was referencing this project that collectively indigenous people are undertaking, which is that of decolonizing themselves, and by trying to liberate their epistemologies and their language and their way of being from being relegated as assets of the past. And so, the idea of the story behind the people of the Standing Stone is that the Oneida people would travel and they would move from place to place, and they would know when they are supposed to arrive at a certain place that is to be their shelter by finding stones standing perfectly upright in the ground. And so the reversal of us gathering stones is like, it's kind of like we're coming to you now. We're bringing you with us rather than us trying to find you. And so the you in this sense being like connection to the land is that, we cannot exist entirely on the land as we did in times in the past, but we are trying to grow, we're trying to heal, we're trying to bring that part of the land with us, to remind us of where we come from and remind us of where we go when we all eventually die. So that's kind of why I created that particular reference, and why in a certain sense I feel like poetry is in and of itself the great liberator of the English language. Many of my favorite poets have used poetry itself to deconstruct and lay bare some of the harms and traumas that the English language has inflicted upon people all over the world. And so, I'm really interested in following that legacy and in following in their footsteps, and doing what I can to, um, take back this language that, for all intents and purposes, was used against me, and now use it to further my cause.
Yeah, I feel like this is making me think directly about another piece that was made by, I think, a mentor of yours, John, Janet Rogers, who made this beautiful piece that we aired on Constellations when we were just starting, called Broken English, where she sliced every word of a text in half and turned it into sort of this rhythmic beat almost. And it was this way of sort of like reclaiming a different approach to this language that she decided to strip of meaning, on her terms. Let's move on to Sophia's piece. So yeah, I think, Sophia, do you want to say anything about the piece before we start, or should we listen and then discuss afterwards?
I'll follow John's lead and say, listen with no preconceived notions.
Great. I feel like it will be interesting to listen to this piece because I feel like it has a very different relationship to land than the past two, but in a really interesting contrast, I think. So,
yeah. I'm not gonna say more.
Spoiler alert. Sorry.
You know what's quite funny is that recently I got a tattoo of like an oil pump on my arm, and
No,
like it was
you
kind of
didn't.
like I'm not even joking, but it's not the way you think it is. Like it was almost talking about when I got it, I was thinking like I had it on a t-shirt of this like kind of cool brand that my friends do here in Dubai, and they like made this like it's a very simple, just like a 2D filled in design, and it's terrible. I might remove it just because it's ugly, but I like the idea of the fact that it was like it was kind of like a nihilistic thing. Like it's just like the consumption, the fact that people are just kind of droning around working mostly in the oil and gas industry, and it like kind of is the fuel for everything, but it creates this very dark cloud over everyone that no one really is aware of. I don't know, I mean there's not that much analysis, it's literally just a fucking pump. I don't feel guilty about it at all, to be quite frank. But I don't about like a lot of my actions. I just recognize that they're that I am complicit and I am part of like a bigger system, but I don't think it's my place or my role to make a difference. Like these things, like it sounds like I'm being an asshole or like flippant or like just trying to justify my actions, but I genuinely don't see myself as like a big part of it. And like I don't know, I just like don't I just like don't think it's like important if I do or if I don't.
It's an incredibly divisive issue. Where do Democrats stand on Biden's proposals?
Well, polling indicates a majority of registered voters in the U.S. view climate change as a real threat to the country. And when you look at Republicans, climate change is actually a lot less divisive the younger you get. But in terms of Democrats, a recent poll by Pew found that...
How does freedom contribute to the violence of climate change? And also, can different imaginaries of freedom assist in slowing or reversing climate change?
Some progressive Democrats want to see. It is not the Green New Deal, despite what the president repeatedly says. But it is more ambitious than what Joe Biden had initially proposed. So, for example, his plan now includes an environmental justice component, which would aim to address the fact that people of color are disproportionately affected by pollution.
Like I feel very self-conscious, or like I have a lot of self-doubt about like what I'm doing, and in the sense that I don't really respect what I'm doing, or like that I don't feel like I'm happy with it.
Good morning. Welcome. Well, first, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here and talking about these important issues. President Obama said in the second inaugural, "We the people still believe that our obligations as Americans are not just to ourselves, but to all posterity. We will respond to the threat of climate change, knowing that failure to do so would betray our children and future generations." To fail in this sort of endeavor would be a very serious kind of moral failure, and I think that part of our motivation to act on climate change should be driven by fear of that failure.
I have like a part of me that is like a bit of like an Epicurean or a hedonist, where I think like a lot of the human experience should be about indulging and like enjoying yourself. Like I don't even feel bad about it.
Industrialized capitalism is an indisputable driving force behind this destruction. It privatizes and financializes natural resources, disinvests in public support for people in their living world, prioritizes short-term profit over long-term sustainability, and generates a worldview in which all ecosystems and life itself are objects that should be exploitable for profit.
No one gives a shit about like, you know, like reducing your use, like, you know, plastic bags, plastic bottles, any of this stuff. No one gives a shit.
The ideal of freedom, as it's often understood in modern Euro-American politics,
like no one ever talks about this type of stuff in the industry.
An idea that encompasses a set of definitions, including personal sovereignty, our unconstrained will.
Like, you know, they might like do some greenwashing where they say like, you know, we want to invest more into green technologies and stuff.
And private ownership of natural resources, as well as the conquest of nature.
But until very recently, until like the stock market, or until like the COVID and the oil price crash, like no one even like gives a shit in this part of the world at all.
The belief that nature is something there to be conquered and controlled in order for humans to live safely on the earth, that all of these things are partly accountable for what we now see as climate change.
I just feel like it's, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think we're that significant. Like, I don't think we are. Like we're very like contradictory people. Like the human species are incredibly contradictory. Like I feel like to live like a very monkish life, abiding by your principles. Like people should have principles, but I feel like the pursuit of living by to the T of what you believe in is like really a flawed pursuit that does nothing except for make you like super depressed and like, I don't know.
So I signal three main reasons for taking ethics seriously.
What political visions position a subject of freedom in a different relationship to nature and to climate change?
First, that we need ethical concepts to identify the relevant problem.
What challenges to climate destruction become possible when the individual who practices freedom is not considered a special entity distinct from or above the natural world?
Second, the ethical considerations are at the heart of the major policy decisions that need to be made.
How can different freedoms help to demand a fight against climate change and the political economic systems that spur it?
And third, that climate change itself poses a severe ethical challenge, and really you don't understand what's going on until you understand that challenge.
Are you like actually applying to new jobs?
No, I just say that I am, and then hopefully that motivates me to do so.
Do you like being there?
No, I hate it.
It's a piece I made in September and October of 2020, so kind of leading up to the 2020 presidential election here in the US. But that doesn't have as much to do with it. There's really just one NPR clip in there that is kind of about Biden. But the other main audio I used was an interview with an anonymous friend that I have, who's a very close friend of mine from when I was a teenager. And he was working in the oil and gas industry in Dubai at the time. And he moved there to do that. And it kind of started with this thought experiment of like, this person who I am very close with is doing this thing that I think is pretty evil. And also just like, what does it mean to be working in a field directly responsible for like the destruction of our planet, like when that feels so close at hand. And so I was just like, I just wanted to talk to him about that, and come from a place of friendship and not a place of, you know, it's not like I was bird dogging a politician about it. So that's the main question. Is I think of this piece as much of a meditation on like personal responsibility as like a character study in this man. The other audio there is a soundtrack. The beeps are made by my friend because I have no composition skills. And as I said, the short NPR clip about oil policy or energy policy under Biden and lectures that I had been listening to. So I was in graduate school at the time doing kind of a mix of things. And one of the lectures is kind of about this idea of like freedom when it comes to making choices around energy usage. And then the other one is by this guy who the first time I read his book, I actually really hated it. And then I kept thinking about it again. And I was like, oh, he got me, about like the ethical climate change is an ethical problem and why like we do or don't do anything about it. So I said this was a character study, but it was also kind of me trying to put into audio what was happening in my brain. And so I felt like I was thinking about my friends, thinking about my own energy consumption, where you like hear the tap and you hear the burners and you hear a leaf blower. And I think I started the piece being like pretty judgmental of my friend. And I was trying to kind of mirror that with the fact that like I'm an American, I live in the Northeast, I live in New York City. Some of those sounds are from suburban Massachusetts. And like, we just use so much more energy than anyone else, the Americans. And so I think that was like thinking about complicity and what that means. And then the other thing that I wanted to say that's funny about this is that my friend did quit his job kind of recently. And I was just in Dubai visiting another friend. And I think like listening to this piece after being there, I have like a million thoughts. It's also really interesting to just the intro about place was interesting because Dubai is a place where 90% of people are expatriates, and a lot of people who end up there, my two friends specifically, this friend who the recording is about, my friend who I was visiting, are both Palestinian. And so a lot of people are there by choice, but a lot of people, it's not their first choice to be. It's like the only viable place in the Gulf to have like a life that you would like as a young person. So I guess that is just, and a lot of the jobs there are oil related, you know, and there's the concept of freedom is very different there because there's monarchy. Anyway, that's all I'll say for now. Thank you so much for letting me play this. This is so much fun, and I love hearing you guys talk about it because there aren't a ton of places to talk about sound art. I don't know if you guys have caught on to that, but Jess and Michelle, it's so special that you guys make room for us. So thank you so much.
Well, having listened to a bunch of your work, Sophia, like that's less sort of arty, I guess, in this way, because you do so much kind of, you know, culture producing and news producing and stuff like that. So I'm so happy that I got to hear this way of thinking through an idea, and it's so complex, I think. And I love how these three strands in the piece come together. Your field recordings, these archival recordings of the radio and public figures and speeches, and this interview with your friend. And something that I find really interesting in the piece is there's often this overlap between the field recordings and the public figure, the archival tape. Like they often happen simultaneously. And I think that really recontextualizes our place as listeners, because we, you know, listen to these tapes and recordings from afar about people telling us how we need to be more engaged or think about these things, and like as we turn on the stove. And so I feel like this piece is really grounded in a sense of complicity and personal responsibility in this way, where you start off again, being judgmental of this subject potentially, and then over the course of the piece kind of inching back on that or having to reconsider. And I think this piece is very interesting in how it positions the listener. Sorry, that's just me waxing poetic. I know I'm supposed to be talking to you. This piece just struck me once again, even though I've listened to it a bunch of times. Anyways, let's talk about your piece more after we listen to our final artist of the morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are, Nicole Ping on. Yeah, Michelle or Nick, I guess we're going to talk about it after. Nicole, do you want to say anything about the work before we listen? I keep on asking this to people.
I can also give like an intro to the mystery box, since it's like a tiny bit different. And then Nicole, if you want to say anything specifically. So like after 2020 and having a really huge year of putting out like a season of Constellations and working with like, I think we had 15 pieces and worked, with like 20 artists or something. And we had a programming committee with Aliyah Pavani, Jess and I, Yuki Yohiranta, and Matthew Karyat-Samari. So we had help, and it was also really big. So we're kind of in this phase of figuring out what's next for Constellations, and we're not going anywhere. And we really recognize like the importance of having sound art as a space. And I just also want to say, even though I failed with the bios thing, like Constellations as kind of a concept like relies on working with people from like such a variety of different approaches to art making from their own kind of mediums. Like RF's a musician, Sophia, you're a journalist, Nicole, you're a theater maker, and John, you're a poet. Like there's like we bring together people who don't necessarily like define themselves as sound artists into the space, and that's always been a really important part of the project. And so as we go forward into talking about like what's next for Constellations and, you know, describing what the mystery box is, I think it's just good to keep in mind that like there's a variety of sound art spaces that exist, and we wish there were more, but like just encouraging anybody to think about sound and pick it up and record something on your phone. You know, you don't have to make it into a piece or a podcast or anything, but we just hope to inspire people across mediums and genres and all that. So with the mystery box, we did encourage people to submit some sounds to us, kind of based around the idea of presence or moments you had to be there for. So kind of gathered and are continuing to gather sounds from people who want to contribute them, like different field recordings, kind of those like moments where you like grabbed your phone or recorder just in time to record something. So nothing too precious or studied or like really thought out or planned. It's really about capturing those moments that just kind of occur in time that you're really present for. And so then we gave these recordings to different artists to do, just have a play with. And it's not meant to like have like fully kind of flushed out compositions necessarily, but to like give people and artists that we wanted to hear from space to have like a little bit of a deadline and a little bit of fun with approaching sound in this way. Because I think for me, I just like love working with found sounds or things I've recorded or other people, and learning how to work with them in that way feels like a really amazing opportunity anytime I get to do it. And I know other people feel the same way. So yeah, that's kind of what the mystery box is about. And there's more on our website. But Nicole is the second artist we asked to create a mystery box. And that's what we're going to play now. So it's composed of these kind of raw recordings submitted to us. And then Nicole, composed and worked with these sounds to create the piece. Nicole, would you like to say anything before we begin?
No, I think that sounds good. And so, what's the context? Looks like.
Look at me again. Maybe I'll come up and sit next to her.
If you would like to request a callback, dial 2. Si vous souhaitez qu'un agent vous rappelle, faites le 2.
Brian, it's Sean Ray in Chico. I'm extremely frustrated. You do not respond to what I send to you. I don't know what to do with this flippin' check I have now. I have not received the check from March yet and don't know what's going on. Will you please respond to me either via email or phone today? Thank you.
But Mama, you gotta be nice. And every time I talk about you, you just roll your eyes. Except for when I'm saying something nice. Oh Mama, oh Mama, oh Mama, oh Mama.
Amazing.
Oh, Mama.
What a great little ditty. Well, we had this amazing question for you, but I also feel like maybe we'll just kind of give you the floor, Nicole, to speak a bit more about your process. Because I think the main thing that we're kind of throwing out of left field in relation to the other pieces is that everybody else has worked with material that they've recorded or kind of archival things they've chosen, whereas yours, we've given you this kind of pot of recordings and sometimes with like very little context and been like, hey, make a piece from this, or what do you think? So can you describe a bit about your approach and how you thought about like working through this kind of jumble of recordings, and though they're kind of removed from place, you're inherently grounded in your place and your practice, so maybe in those terms as well, how you approach them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was 12 recordings off the top of my head. So it's like 12 recordings, and also the last mystery box session, which Michelle had worked on, was the two things that I was given as parameters to use all the 12 sounds, utilize the session as the basis of this piece. And yeah, I guess the process for me was very much just about following curiosity and allowing the pieces to lead where they want to be and what they wanted to be, which I think is kind of my approach to everything, particularly sound, where because there's so much within it, and I guess I was not as much trying to contextualize the sound for myself, but rather just listening and going, oh, this is what I'm hearing today, and these things are speaking to in relation to each other for me today. And that was kind of my approach going through the whole process, was even so all these recordings have come from a specific time and place and moment in time. Me mixing this is me mixing this at this particular point in time in this place where I am. So allowing that kind of curious, fleeting nature of it to inform the whole process. And yeah, I guess just following that and allowing things to emerge as they came. So pretty much the approach. Yeah.
So wonderful. Yeah, I think there's something where we really feel like we go on a bit of a journey with your piece that you've created, and like we kind of start with, actually it's a recording that I believe Jess made of being at the Met, I think, and kind of opening, the kind of tuning note opening. And it just kind of spirals outward in an amazing way from there. And we kind of are dropped off at all of these different locations. So for me, there's something like intensely like about location and space. And we really hear those kind of these different moments in time. Yeah, and get these like little different windows into time.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was something I was, I guess, like honoring in a subconscious way of being aware that these recordings had come from people at points in time in different places. So finding ways to create that sense of, like moving through time and place, even though I wasn't, I guess I'm not in control of what that is, and I don't think I'd want to be, and allowing listeners, it's kind of an offering of, we're just gonna, move through time and space, and whatever you bring to it today is what you'll hear and where that'll take you. Yeah. And I guess for me, like, I never really saw it, because I think in the question it's like personal voice. I was like, oh, I don't really feel like it's my personal voice. I'm just here to listen and kind of shape it. And through my curiosity, I guess, is where my touch comes in. But ultimately, I feel like everything informed me, and I was just responding to what was given to me.
And I think that speaks really well to like the project of the mystery box and constellations as a whole is really just about the act of listening, and letting the listening inform the work rather than trying to fit the work into your preconceived notion of what things should be. And I wish there was more spaces for that, but I mean, it's a challenging world to kind of sit back and listen sometimes, or create things that are about listening. But I really value that in your mystery box, Nicole, and then across your work kind of more broadly. So I can keep speaking about your mystery box for a long time and everybody else's work, but I'm just aware that we're kind of like sandwiched up to the end of this. But I wanted to just see if we quickly had a few minutes for some questions, or even for the different artists to ask each other things, because that also doesn't happen very often. I just wanted to check with Darren if that is possible.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Well, maybe if people would like our kind of audience members want to ask something in a sec, that'd be great. But I just do want to give the artists a chance to maybe respond to each other if they had questions, because again, we'll likely, as much as I'd love to be in the same room again with all of you, it may not happen. I'd love to just have some space for all of you to ask if someone does have something to say.
It's not so much a question, but I was hoping to sort of talk to the individual artists about like maybe a single detail in each piece that really struck me, and they can respond if they wish or not. If that sounds like a good idea, let's go. So I suppose we'll go sort of sequentially here, backwards. First of all, thank you all for making these pieces. This would be, it's the third time I'm hearing them now, and I have enjoyed them more and more each time. So thank you for your work. Nicole, I think that what is really extraordinary is that you were sort of put in a position of, in a sense, curation, really, if you're given pieces and you have to put them together. And curation is always a kind of juxtaposition. And of the various juxtapositions that occur in the piece, the one that I found most compelling was the moment in which you had a pre-recorded message followed by a voicemail. And I think that this is a really beautiful example of a pre-recorded message is, in a sense, the past reaching into the present. It's something that was that we're hearing now, but then it was juxtaposed against a voicemail. And a voicemail is very much something that exists in the present that we're sending off into the future. And I thought that that was a really interesting through line between of time, and I thought it was really well done, and I commend you for doing that. Sophia, I really enjoyed your piece as well, and what I thought was really striking about the work was that your subject, your friend, his character, and like I don't want to say he was like stubborn or disagreeable, but he has a kind of oily quality about him. There's something kind of viscous and sort of, I found that really extraordinary how there is a connection between your subject and the speaker involved, and I thought that that was a really compelling detail that existed within your work. John, the first time that I heard your piece, I was actually left with a very hopeful sense, and I was trying to sort of unpack where the hope in that statement in your piece comes from. And the conclusion that I reached is that perhaps there is no more hopeful phrase in the English language than "we will." "We will" is a phrase that carves out a space in the future. And in the same way that walking is a kind of stumbling forward, I think that "we will," without a guarantee of a successful outcome, allows us to carve out a kind of a hope, which can help us deal with the despair of the present and despair of the past. And so those are three little rapid fire takeaways that I had from all of your work. And once again, I just want to thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you, Arif. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, there is my favorite thing to do as like a poet, but also as just a listener, is to draw connections between things. And I think that there's a lot of connections. There's more connections than you might think between all four of the pieces. I think the connection is the will to speak and the desire to be heard is like present throughout all of them. And I think I love the idea of like, you know, there's this magic of sound that is pervasive throughout all of the pieces, yeah, like some of it's necessity, like Arif, you were talking about the voicemail, the voice messages left by your friends on WhatsApp, and how that was a necessity because it was the most cohesive and straightforward form of communication between you and your peers. And but there's also this kind of alchemy that happens in Nicole's piece and in Sophia's piece about juxtaposing sounds that or like how sounds that are placed together change both themselves individually and each other. And I guess that's kind of one thing I wanted to talk about. One question I wanted to raise specifically to Nicole and to Sophia, because because the resources and the elements are so disparate. Like there's lectures, there's recordings, there's archival stuff. Um, do you feel like the order that you listen to something in dictates where it belongs in the piece? Because I would think that the orchestral tuning of the beginning of your piece, Nicole, it very much signifies the beginning of something. It signifies the beginning of a performance. And Sophia, in your piece, it begins with this kind of like almost like a theme song almost. It's like a transitional sort of like theme song like that you would hear at the beginning of a traditional journalist radio piece. And how do we begin is often something that I struggle to answer with myself in my pieces, because poems you begin by turning the page, whereas like in sound pieces we often start with we have to start with sound. So Arif, you can also talk about this as well. What made you choose to pick the sound that you started with?
I think it's a great question, John, and I really like this comment you made about how sounds, when placed next to each other, change each other, because I think that's really the crux of Nicole's piece, right? That was the challenge she was given, where to place these in relation to each other. And it's also, I think, very much at the heart of mine. I think also what was important for me was like putting sounds together that aren't often considered together, like this lefty academic speaking to her audience against like a centrist politician speaking to NPR audience, next to my friend who is saying things that he keeps contradicting himself, and yeah, he's quite oily. I think order is everything, right? I think I don't know how I chose to start. Oh, with the tattoo. He's describing his tattoo of the oil rig. I just think it's so ridiculous. I think I started with my best tape, which is maybe a cheap trick, but I think a lot of the piece, you're also unsure what's going on. It's kind of hard to situate yourself, which is like maybe why I didn't want to contextualize it. But I just like getting a tattoo of an oil pump. It automatically is like, I think there's humor in it if you see humor in that. But also it's like, who is this person? And like, why are they the subject of this like experimental work on Constellation? Like those two things maybe don't necessarily go together.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I guess receiving this pool of sounds, the orchestra tuning feels like a very obvious beginning. So at first I was like, oh, is this like too obvious? Is this the obvious choice? But then the more I listen to it, I'm like, oh, but this is epic. like what an honor to get to sit there and, you know, you're like, oh, now I feel like I'm at the Met, like preparing for this performance. And I was like, what a gift that I was able to receive in that recording from Jess. I'm like, great, let's pass it on to everyone. Yeah, because I think sometimes I'm like, I don't need to be clever about this and bring the big, like this traditionally beginning sound elsewhere. And I was like, nah, not this time. Yeah, it was just such a great offering that just to pass that on.
John, I think that's such a lovely question, and it brought up two small details that I wanted to also contribute. One is that, Sophia, I really enjoyed how the piece started with sort of invoking a tattoo, because we look at tattoos as symbols of permanence, despite the fact that our organic skin is not permanent. But we look at them as symbols of permanence, but oil is, of course, a very finite resource. And placing these two together, I thought was a really beautiful way to start the piece, and that was the immediate thought that I had when on first listen, and I had it again on second and third listen. Nicole, like by starting with an orchestra tuning, I'm reminded of what the great dervishes of my region say, which is that in order to be a musician, first you tune your instrument, and then you tune yourself, and then you tune your audience. And it was sort of a line that has always stuck with me, and I thought was quite relevant to the piece and a really great idea for starting the show, for starting the work.
Amazing. I think we'll need to wrap up in the next couple of minutes, but we want to, if there are a question or two from the audience, now's your time.
Hi. I just want to say to John that I've done a couple times a Mohawk course online. I forget the name because it was a few years ago. Originally, I was going to talk just about how I was curious, I guess, how you chose the words that you put into your poem. Was there certain sound structures or words that you wanted that flowed together? Is that part of the creation of your piece, John, that you chose words that had a sound?
It's a good question. Thank you very much for it. Yeah, when I created the poem in English first, I relied on very tried and true, tested. I just did it myself. I just used tried and true methods of like word making and wordsmithery. So there's the "we will" part, which Era very thankfully pointed out as like this message of hope, this invocation of hope. And in that there's this poetic term for like words that begin with the same letter being crafted into literature. It's called consonants. And I employed consonants in this way because it's a very familiar kind of like sound that like you get it a lot in like nursery rhymes, you get it in a lot of like children's like songs, and you get this feeling that it's something easily understandable, it's easily followable, it's a mantra in the sense that it's something that's repeatable, but by through its repetition, it gains more and more meaning and more power. And so that's kind of why I chose the basic structure to be the we will part. It also made it a lot easier for myself because nouns and verbs in indigenous languages operate in a very particular kind of way. And so I wanted to make it easier for myself to translate the concepts as closely as I could, and then leave the rest of the effort on the words themselves to carry the meaning. But just a quick note on language learning. I have to give a huge shout out to my original language instructor for Mohawk. Her name was Ima Johnson. She was a first language speaker from Six Nations of the Grand River, and Ima Johnson passed away a couple of years ago, but her warmth and her attentiveness and her ability to make a young language learner not feel guilty for saying words slightly in the wrong way, or who is struggling, I think still resonates with me. And it's the only reason I have the courage I do to say the words as weakly and but also as strongly as I can. And so I miss Ima Johnson very dearly, and I'd like to say that I owe a great deal of my courage and my bravery and my voice to her. But thank you for the question.
Incredible. Sadly, I think we need to wrap up now because we all have some things to get to. But if you are curious about the artist more, being in conversation more across different social media things, you can always reach out to us that way, and we can pose questions to the artists. And Jess has just posted our website in the chat. So just most of all, I'm just so grateful to have this time and space with you all today across our various days. You're all brilliant in such distinctive, unique, amazing ways. And just getting to listen to you all is just, I learned so much about these pieces and all of your work and how you approach things. And just really thankful that we got to be here today in conversation. And thank you for bringing yourselves and your brilliant insights and your listening and everything to these works and to each other. And really appreciative. And thank you as well to Darren for making the space happen.